Hey, welcome. So it's myself, Kylie, and Rory, and today we are talking about the entitlement importation process. So tell me about this process, Rory.
So what to tell you, to understand it, I guess, what entitlement you're actually importing, the way we've modelled the process, you're looking at contracts and you're looking at licenses as well. It's rare that you do one or the other. You have to do both typically. And also to understand too the relationship between licenses and contracts as well. That's quite important to understand.
Yeah, so there's a one-to-many relationship between licenses and contracts. So you might have many licenses sitting underneath a contract. And of course, there's a one-to-many, potentially one-to-many relationship between your contracts and vendors as well. So this is one reason why managing your license contracts can end up so complicated, because they're just all over the place, basically. So yeah, this process is all about getting your entitlements, so your licenses, into your tool so that you can then, your SAM tool can then help you calculate where you are in terms of your compliance, really. So this is a really critical step in automating your compliance calculations.
Yeah, couple of things too on the process perhaps doesn't lend itself to, or it sort of hints at, but doesn't actually explicitly spell out, and that is, of course, having a decent working relationship with whoever goes through the procure to pay or management of contracts for your organisation, because they have pending trays every bit as much as everybody else. So making sure they run in an agile fashion with a small a, obviously, just to make sure that they expedite that entitlement to make sure it comes through as quickly as possible, because that is a change cycle alongside your IMAC activity as well. So the more streamlined that is, the more faith you can put in any compliance reports that you push out.
Yeah, and this process has a big risk associated with it. It's the one process in the entire process kit that has a risk, a big red risk. And that is because it's really common for organisations to upload purchase orders as entitlement, but actually purchase orders aren't entitlement. You need invoices at the absolute minimum. So although you can upload your POs, making the assumption that they get converted into an invoice and you actually receive the entitlement. But if you do that, you do need to make sure that you add in an extra process at the back end to make sure that you have received all your invoices and that you're not actually uploading as entitlement something that isn't really entitlement because you never actually bought it, you never paid for it. So I think that's a really important thing, is that risk right there. It's really easy to use POs and think that that's what you own, but that's really not the case. So you do need to make sure that what you're uploading is actually genuine entitlement.
Yeah, and ignore that advice at your peril, because when it will come to bite you is at the audit stage. If you start presenting POs, I guarantee a vendor will say that's not sufficient evidence, because basically a PO is an expressed intention to buy rather than evidence of purchase.
Yeah. So another problem with this process can be that SAM tools are often making a sort of a strict count of how many licenses you've actually purchased. But of course, licenses and the use rights that are involved with licenses can actually depend very much on the contract terms under which they've been purchased. So you might find that if you've got particular contract terms within your organisation, that the licenses behave differently from that which is predicted by your SAM tool. So again, being careful to make sure that your SAM tool understands the correct terms and conditions of the licenses is really important, to make sure that you can get that entitlement calculation as automated as possible, and doing as little manual work to say, yes, well, actually these licenses behave in this particular way because our contract says so. So you do need to make sure that you're very clear about what those contract terms are, and where possible, make sure that your SAM tool takes them into account as well.
Yeah, I mean, just as a sidebar, I had that with shall we say, a global entity.
Yeah.
So they were really using their purchasing power with Oracle, strangely enough, and where the standard term and condition is software is considered consumed, whether it's installed or used. They just got it. They whittled out the installed bit, so they just had used.
Yeah, nice.
So, kudos to whoever is in procurement for that one. I mean, now, that's not to say that when, the Oracle audit occurs, what is your definition of use? That may well need spelling out as well, because the auditor knocking on the door will have a different definition from the one that you might have interpreted in the contract. So, again, you're drilling down to that minutiae of legalese that you really need to get weighed off in your SAM suite.
Yeah. So I think that's a really great point. Well done to that procurement team, to be honest. That's brilliant. But yeah, so you can see that individual organisations really can adjust those contract terms, and so you do need to make sure that you take them into account. So the next thing, of course, is you're taking data that's often not particularly well structured because it's invoices and and contracts and that sort of thing, and uploading it into a tool. So you need to make sure that upload is correct. It's very easy to just upload stuff into a spreadsheet and expect that will go into the tool the way you expect it. So the next thing to think about is making sure that upload works correctly. And again, because of the different ways different contracts work, and then the impact that has on the ways that the licensing needs to be interpreted, you do need to make sure that you have that correct for every single contract. But of course, once you've got it done once, then after that the uploads for that contract should be pretty much the same. But you do need to make sure that you have those QA checks in there, particularly the first time you're uploading licenses from a contract, but then just to sort of checks in there to make sure that things have gone smoothly after that.
Yeah, because one of the, shall we say, schoolboy errors that catches all SAM professionals out is that they might say, for example, load up a blast of licenses and feel that they've done a good job, and then realise once they look at the evidence in the tool as to how it's represented by the tool, it means that a re-import is required, is to go back to that tool and make sure that the re-import, there is an assumption that the re-import will overwrite the former import. 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. What it will do is it will add another batch of licenses on and just slightly tweak the name to make sure that it doesn't dedupe the or duplicate the original import. So if you have gone through that, don't forget to purge the former import when you then re-import your corrected cycle of licenses there and evidence.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be duplicating your entitlement, do you?
No.
Not great. So what else?
There's whilst we've talked about the entitlement importation, and that is getting, contract and license data in. We have another process called software asset data verification, which really then drills down into the minutiae of aligning that data to your business structure then potentially, or making sure it is fit for purpose, from a business perspective rather than from an IT or a SAM perspective. So again, this is a kind of a hop, skip and a jump to get you where you need to be. So just be respectful of that. Try not to do everything all at once. Yeah,
but having said that, this is a BAU process. So this process, along with the inventory importation process, which is effectively its twin, you need those two to be able to put together your automated licensing calculations as part of your license pool management process. So this is something that you should be doing regularly. You should be minimising the manual work involved in it, and you should be streamlining it as much as possible, because this is really the core. This process and the inventory importation process are the core of license management.
Yeah, and that plays back then to that idea of having good working relationships with procurement and contract management as well, because you don't want to be getting people's backs up merely because, you fell out with them at a Christmas party or whatever. You want good working relationships with those departments so they understand the need and the necessity of getting that information as quickly as possible over to you.
Yeah, so this process, like we said, it's the core of license management along with the inventory importation process. So the big process that leads out from this is your license pool management process, which is the one which tells you, are we compliant or not? So that one, and the other one that we've already mentioned is the license compliance audit and validation process, which is where we make sure that all of our data is accurate. So those two processes, the license pool management process is the meat. It tells you where you are in terms of compliance, and your validation process tells you that you're accurate and that actually what your license pool is telling you is correct. They're really, really important processes. They are the fundamentals of license management. But other processes that this one feeds out to include the vendor onboarding process. So for instance, how do you make sure that when you sign up a contract with a new vendor that you can import your entitlement, that you do know how that new license is managed. So that's an important one that it feeds out to. And then So the data validation process as well. And we mentioned license pool management as being the core of your license management system, along with license compliance, audit, and validation. So those two processes cannot operate unless you get this process correct.
Yeah, and again, because it just serves to highlight that yin and yang of the relationship, we talked or kind of mentioned the inventory importation process. If you are going to that license pool process to see what licenses you have in reserve, the yang of that then is making sure that if you do have unused software, that you're systematically purging that from your IT estate as well, because your existing licenses that go against those installs that are not being used can then get refed back into that license pool. So it's having that idea that SAM is rather like the cogs, managing the cogs in a watch. You know, it all interlinks. It all interlinks.
Yeah. So I think that's it really. This is a really important process.
Yes.
You've got to be doing it. Automate it as much as possible, but make sure you get it right fundamentally.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Like anything else, it's
Yes. All right. Well, cheers, and we'll see you later.